Once her mother had left, and the sound of her footfalls proved that she'd gone down the stairs, Caroline turned to Nita. "I'll dress myself if you would be willing to go to the kitchens and fetch me a breakfast that I can eat quickly." Nita shook her head. "Your mother is in an awful mood. Is poking her further such a good idea?" The casual comment made Caroline think her mother might be right about her being too relaxed with her servants, but she preferred them disrespectful and honest. "It is precisely because of her awful mood that I require this. Clearly a scolding is in my future, and the chances of me being trapped in that drawing-room until dinner are extremely high. Please, Nita, I will need my strength to face whatever is coming." Nita swallowed hard and took a last desperate look toward the door before giving a sharp nod and leaving. Things had been strained regarding the staff after Caroline's father had died. They worried over the future, which made sense. The estate was entailed on Caroline's cousin, a pleasant man who allowed her family to remain at the family home in spite of her father's passing, in spite of the fact that the home was now his. But Caroline's cousin was not an old man. She had met him several times during the course of her seasons in London and found him to be handsome, intelligent, and agreeable. In truth, Mr. Moore's youth and charm, a newfound wealth of property that came to him by way of her father's passing, meant he was in a position where marriage was an amiable notion. His marrying would necessitate him taking possession of his inheritance. His taking over his inheritance meant Caroline and her mother would be displaced. So yes, the household servants were worried. Would the new master keep them on? Would the new master be as good to them as her father and mother had been? For even though Caroline's mother occasionally indulged in moody tempers, she was a practical woman and treated those in her employment with respect and fairness. But they all had time. Mr. Moore had not declared a preference for any young lady, as of yet. Her mother had once hoped Caroline and Mr. Moore might find a compatibility with one another beyond mutual respect. But being agreeable and being compatible were not the same thing. Mr. Moore preferred pretty ladies with pretty smiles on mouths that remained closed. Caroline knew she was pretty with her dark hair and fair face, but keeping her mouth closed proved to be a struggle for her on most occasions. Though her cousin laughed alongside Caroline as they debated the finer points of politics, and he'd seemed to enjoy hearing her opinion on the state of the world, he did not ask her to dance at many of the balls. Once dressed, and the rolls spread with marmalade Nita had smuggled out of the kitchen had been devoured, Caroline squared her shoulders, lifted her skirts, and descended the stairs. When she entered the drawing-room, she hesitated at the sight of her mother, bent over needlework. Her mother never did needlework unless she wanted to think. She felt it a waste of her time, and she didn't much care for the way her fingers cramped from the tedious, repetitive motion. Caroline didn't care much for needlework either, but her mother insisted she maintain the skill. "Once you're mistress of your own home, you can choose to quit the endeavour altogether, but not until then," her mother often said. Her father had laughed when her mother said such things. He'd taken great pride in his two daughters, their only children due to her mother's poor health in childbearing, and they had raised the girls to be inquisitive and expressive. Her parents had expanded their daughters' education to include politics, science, and literature, fields of study more often reserved for gentlemen, which meant that Caroline and her sister Josephine were well-read and knowledgeable enough to make discussion in a room full of ladies quite difficult. Josephine had been lucky enough to make a match with a man who loved his wife's wit and intelligence. He wasn't wealthy, but the living he provided his wife was comfortable, since Josephine knew how to run her household efficiently. Caroline had yet to find such a man. Most of them were put off by her strong opinions. Most ladies were put off by those opinions as well. And though her mother had encouraged the very science lessons that had led to Caroline's failure to find a man in her first, second, third, and fourth season, her mother still scolded her as if the fault fell entirely at Caroline's own feet. But her mother doing needlepoint, something more severe than a scolding awaited. "Sit," her mother said, without looking up from her work. Caroline sat. Her mother finally laid her hoop and needle to the side on the settee and looked up.